Hey folks, welcome to Snowpal's Polyglot Software Development Podcast. Our guest today is Siddharth Parakh. Siddharth has more than 16 years of industry experience building SaaS and web products for large e-commerce, fintech, and health tech companies. Siddharth has had the privilege of transitioning from a software developer to an engineering leader role. This journey, as Siddharth mentions, has been immensely fulfilling and has allowed him to gain a comprehensive understanding of the technical, managerial, and business aspects of computer science and various other technologies in the space of software development. So I'm looking forward to having this conversation. Siddharth, thanks for taking the time to chat with me here.
Yeah, my pleasure, Chris. Always.
So I gave that brief introduction, but if you could just introduce yourself to our audience in your own words, that would be awesome.
Yeah. Um, so very early, like you mentioned, I've like been 16 years. I graduated in India. I did my bachelor's in engineering in India. Started working there very early with a product company called Digite. Moved to US eventually as part of one of my roles. I was working on a couple of projects that time directly with some US customers, and that's how I kind of ended up moving here in 2010, and then been here since. So it's been a long journey, but I think the fulfilling part comes from the value. So very early in my life, I realized that I did not only enjoy like developing a product, but seeing the journey of its, like, we building a like thinking of a concept with product managers, building it into the feature, but seeing the rollout and how it's affecting the customers. I think that part I always found very fascinating. I was always drawn to the other side when I would see like the customer testimonials coming in, gave me a lot of validation of the work. And that's where somewhere in my mind started, I want to move to more leadership roles, so I can probably witness this journey even more firsthand rather than being siloed in a cubicle. So I think that's how this journey started. Yeah. Uh, During this career, I have tried many things in terms of different career options. I've done also some sales because I wanted to learn sales. And I was fortunate enough that people allowed me to do it as an engineer. And then I have also did MBA. I did started, I never finished it, but I started my MBA in Berkeley Haas. It was a very, very interesting program. I had to stop it because of life happened, and then I still have option to complete it by 2025, so I might pick it up. But yeah, that's like quick introduction.
That's a great introduction. Thank you for that. Our topic for the day was, we loosely picked a topic before the call for the folks who are watching, listening to this. It was going to be how developers can use AI to augment their work, right? And typically, how our podcast roll, if you've watched it or listened to it before, we start with a topic that's loosely defined and then explore as we go. And we found a lot of value, and our audience has found a lot of value in that process as well. The reason I mentioned that in particular at the top of this podcast, Siddharth, is while the topic we had picked was what I just mentioned, what you actually told me just now, what you told us just now, has got me thinking. Right? There's a bunch of things I would love to learn in the next 45 minutes to an hour, and I think by virtue of me learning, my hope is the people who are watching and listening to this also end up having that learning, and that's typically how the podcast journey has been so far. The thing that caught my attention from what you said is you said you started your career as a developer, but your interest was sort of knowing the big picture, right? Building software is one thing, but knowing the journey of where the idea was conceived in the mind to releasing it to production and seeing how the customers are using it is where you found an interest in.
Yeah,
I mean, before I ask my question and kick off this part of the conversation, would that be a fair summary of what you had just mentioned?
yeah, yeah. That's absolutely fair. Yeah.
Okay, and that's very interesting to me because if I drew a spectrum of developers, right? Listen, both of us are developers, and I'm just going to draw a random spectrum here. We've worked. What this? I'm going to turn off the center stage because it's actually freaking out. It's moving all over the place. Okay, hopefully it's stable now. The thing about developers, at least from my experience, speaking as one of them, is there are a set of developers who like to build software. You sit in your cube or you sit in your office, you sit in your home, wherever your library, wherever it is that you're building software. You want to be interacting with the machine for the most part. Any interactions that you do have that's not with the machine, even if it's a meeting that you're supposed to have like once a day, right? You look at that as a distraction, if you will. Oh my God, I need to get on this call and spend like an hour. That's like 1 hour less for me to write code. Oh
Yeah,
my God, I need to talk to a product manager. I'm going to have half an hour less for me to actually write code. That's, at least from what I've seen, one type of a developer. And I've been one of them for many years like that. The other end of that spectrum, loosely defining, is what you mentioned is understanding the bigger picture. What is it that I'm building? Who's going to be using this? What difference does it make to anybody that I'm even building this? That I'm part of a team that's actually in the process of building the software. Let's say, I'm using extremes loosely. It's not good or bad, but let's say these are two extremes.
true.
You tell me, in your what in your opinion, why you said you like to see the big picture. Why do you like to see the big picture? Like, if I said, Siddharth, why would you not just write code all day long? Why do you care to know who's using it, if somebody's using it at all, who the customer is? I just want to play the devil's advocate and get your thoughts on why you like that.
So yeah, it's a very, very interesting question. Thank you for asking that question. First of all, nobody's asked me that
Yeah.
question, like why you wanted to do it. But there are a few aspects to it. I think one is the fulfillment part of it. Like, when I write something end of the day, right? It is like a general curiosity I always had that how it is being used, right? And that always drew fulfillment. I'm also a person, I'm not a typical wired engineer. I get bored pretty fast with something that I'm doing without much purpose or much bigger picture in life. And then if it doesn't have that, I have no motivation to do it. So for me to stay engaged in the process, I think it was always that part. Like I loved hearing stories. I loved hearing what people are talking about it. It also allowed me to do my job better. So when I reverse that cycle, for an engineer, most engineers are extremely introvert, right? We don't come from a background where we can talk about our work for many hours, to be honest, right? Most of us cannot. And especially people who are like hardcore cubicle, like
Right.
skin driven engineers. Okay. And I think the biggest part there is also, which I was, and I lost train of my thoughts. But yeah, so most engineers are not wired to basically come in open to talk about something. And in my case, what happened is because if I could find a purpose into something that I'm doing, then I'll get bored very fast. And if I get bored, I lose interest. How it helped me in my job, at least, is to keep my interest alive, right? It also helped me do better job because when I heard problems, like a lot of times from an engineer's perspective, oh, it is just a flag, you can tweak it and it is not a big deal, right? But for a user who's not tech savvy, right, it can be a huge deal for him to figure out where that flag is, right? Or where that setting is and go turn on that setting to solve a problem, right? And I've seen many applications of it which always made me think more from the user's perspective. I think that I think I got much better in my engineering because I had a perspective. I was always wearing a hat. Like, hey, this might sound like a very trivial technical problem. Like, what if I have to click two extra buttons? What a big deal in that, right? But I think it is the user, for him clicking those two extra can be extremely painful. In clinical trials, I see it even more. Like in my current space, something that would look like a simple task, right? When a patient on a clinical trial, say is a cancer patient or a like epilepsy or some kind of disease, it is extremely, they're already going through a lot of trauma, like physical, mental, and on top of that they also have to deal with this thing that they absolutely hate. Nobody likes to go through treatments, right? And they are already like at a point in their life where they have not much hope left. Very few people are positive in that process, right?
Mm.
Because they've been chronically suffering from some illness from a really long time. So if you don't have that user's perspective in mind and when you're building something, I think that you cannot do justice to your part as an engineer. And I think that's why it's extremely critical that everybody should take interest. You don't have to be an extrovert to learn about a customer, right? You can read a report, you can watch a video offline that your sales or marketing or product team has recorded of some conversation with your customers. But it still allows you to be much better engineer in terms of design thinking, at least. Yeah.
You know what? So that wonderfully said, right? A lot of times during the podcast, I have this sentiment I want to share literally when somebody's saying it, but in the interest of not interrupting that thought process, I hold my reactions. So sometimes my reactions are not as honest as they should be, because when halfway through what you said, I was like, you know what, this makes a lot of sense, and I want to stress upon this to folks who are watching this. If you're a developer who's just getting started or has done this for a while, yes, there is a tendency that, hey, I need to get a bunch of things done in my sprint. I cannot really take time to understand what the customer wants. That's not my headache. I'm given a certain job. I'm going to show up at work, whether I'm doing it from home or from the office. I'm going to get this done and be done with it. While that mindset and mentality, I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. You stay focused on what it is, whatever it is that you're doing. But from what I've seen, so that where it actually doesn't help, at least my personal opinion is, one day as you grow in your career and you start thinking about becoming an entrepreneur, you're like, yeah, I need to build something of my own. I want to start a company. I want to have a startup. Maybe you're a solopreneur. Maybe you have a partner. Maybe you have two people. If you did not take the approach that you just mentioned, you're going to be in a bit of a trouble, a fair bit of trouble, because all that you had in experience all these years was building software. You had no idea how somebody consumed your software. You had no clue why your product team came back and told you to make some changes. You just listened to the changes they told you to make, and you happily made those changes without digesting the rationale behind those changes. And that's a big problem, because when you go start a business, you need to have that level of understanding so you know what it is that you're building. Because you try to be a developer when you start a company, it is going to be a problem. And I say this through personal experience, through personal experience, because I personally enjoy just, I'm an extrovert, I'm not an introvert, but I still enjoy just building software for many, many years, right? Not being interested in who it is that it was even being built for, because I did my job and hopefully I did it reasonably well enough, is at least my belief. But my clients have to speak to it. But the problem was, when you go to start a company, you would then realize, oh my God, how do I talk to a customer? How do I find a customer? What is a product market fit? How do I find product market fit? None of those things seem to happen, right? So what you're saying makes complete sense. I want to dig a little bit deeper into the business side of things from what you said. But let's say somebody says, Siddharth, that's a great point. But perhaps for the next many years, I don't intend to start my own company. I intend to continue to work for this organization or for a different company in similar capacities.
Mhm.
If that is an assumption, is there any value in me learning who this product is being used by, or which geographical part of the world somebody is using this? Or can I justify to myself that, Krish, you know what? Ignore everything. Don't bother about who's using it. Keep building it like you have been doing all along, because my intent is not in starting a business. I mean, does that make sense? You say, if I just want to have get your thoughts on talking to somebody who says, I'm not starting a business in the near future, but
Mhm.
so tell me, convince me that I still need to understand what I'm building.
Yeah, so this is basically as part of leadership, right? And a lot of people think leadership is only when you are like a C-level executive, right? You're leader at your own role, right? How do you separate yourself from the masses? So if I'm a software engineer, right, how do I separate myself from most software engineers who are doing exact same job, right? So it comes back to, so you have to still show leadership within your team, right? Even if you don't have to show it at the organization level. And when you have this kind of thinking inculcated in your behavior, right, it helps you think better. You're drafting better solutions, right? Like, I'll take my example, right? Entrepreneurship has always been something I want to work towards, but this is not the only thing, right? I still want to grow while I haven't started my company. I want to grow in my career path, right? We all are material beings, right? When it comes to that, we all want to do better in our roles. Some people are thriving, like optimizing for significance. Some people are optimizing for money. No matter what you do, you need to be very good at what you do, right? And that's where this. So even if you somebody don't want to start a company, how do they get better at dealing with ambiguity? Right, is the only defining principle generally, which basically shows how wider scope you can manage. So today I'm giving you a small API. Tomorrow I'm going to give an entire integration suite to build, right? How would I trust you that you can build this integration suite versus just writing a small API function? So I think that kind of only happens when you are showing some early level ownership, accountability in your role, right? So for you to be able to do that and you to really thrive at that, to know you're doing right thing, all of this helps. Even when you work, another aspect I'll tell you, which is something I have been kind of emphasizing on a lot within my people that I work with within the groups, is this whole quality mindset, right? How do you know that what you built is the best quality if you don't know how it's going to be used? right? Or why? What is the intention behind somebody logging into this form and filling out this form? And what mindset they will have when they'll be filling out. Like a mindset of somebody applying for a mortgage would be very different than somebody applying, somebody filling out a daily task who's part of a clinical research. So I think that mindset shift will determine what level of details or how intuitive this form needs to be, right? And those kind of inputs are really critical for you to think you're designing a better solution. So that's what my pitch to you would be, that don't worry about starting a company, right? You don't have to. You can still do a lot better in your current role if you have growth mindset. If you don't want to grow and you want to do the exact same job, then we can augment AI to do that, right? Then why do we need experts? Yeah.
These are great points. I say this because it is so important. I'm trying to play the devil's advocate quite intentionally here, right? It's
Yeah.
hard to disagree with what you're saying, but I just want to just have multiple perspectives, because many a times you end up working with a team or a bunch of developers who are very good at what they do, but they almost don't seem to have this interest in knowing the big picture. And it depends on your career and which phase of your career you're in as well. If I get started with the company, if you hired me and then Monday morning I come to you, Siddharth, and ask you a bunch of questions without being productive, you're going to be like, Krish, can you actually show some productivity before you have all these questions that are out of curiosity, right? So there is a line that you need to draw. You need to have the curiosity to grow and learn, but while being curious, you also need to be productive, because I need to add value to Siddharth's organization in the meantime while I'm trying to enhance myself as a person, personally and professionally. Now that's where things can get a little bit challenging. Now I'm going to try to make this difficult for you,
Yeah.
right? As difficult as I possibly can, but with good intent. Trust me, right? So I'm going to take some examples here. And again, when I do this, sometimes I want to draw something. I don't draw well, but I love drawing, and that's how I think. Or sometimes I just pull up one of our products. Now we have a few different products at our company, but I almost always pull up our web interface, because the mobile app, I'm actually using my phone as a camera for the podcast, so I couldn't pull it up on my screen. And then the APIs, they're visually not attractive to show necessarily, right? So the web app is just an easy thing to have this conversation. So just the background for you. So I'm going to do a screen share here and ask you a few questions, and we're going to play this role. You're going to be the product owner, right? And you're part of product management, right? You're basically coming up with requirements and telling me what to do. I'm the developer. We're going to sort of do some role playing here and see how the theory that we just discussed, and we both agreed. Your points are super valid, and I wholeheartedly agree with those points. But I want to put that into practice and kind of see how it goes, right? Where some of the challenges are. Does that
Sure.
make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. Let's do
Okay.
it. Sounds
So
fun.
let me go. I'm going to do a screen share here. Let me share my screen. Okay. Tell me once you see this window. Do you see? Because when I see that, I don't see you. Can you see my window?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Okay, so this is long story short. So that this is one of our products. It's a project management platform. It's one of the interfaces, a web applications. That's essentially right. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to log into this. I'm going to take one of these things, right? So I'm not going to go into the details of the app, but let's take a very simple example to kind of take our conversation forward.
Yeah.
The whatever we just talked about. Let's say you're the product owner. Let's say I'm the lead developer. Maybe I lead the sprint team, or however you look at it. Right? Maybe the engineering team lead or whatnot. So we're having this conversation where you're like, Krish, you know what? We need to add a new feature. Let's presume that if I go here, we have a feature called, we have a Kanban interface, for instance, right?
Mhm.
Let's say we did not have this interface because we did not have it when we launched the initial version of this
I see.
application. And now you come to me and telling me, Chris, you know what? You need to build this interface. But let's say maybe to do this role playing a bit exciting, so that if you can make some assumptions about this. If you were
Okay.
to come to me with implementing this feature, how would this conversation start? That just so you know part of the folks who are watching this are actually folks who are in college or just getting into the space of engineering. So what is very obvious to someone like you with a lot of experience is not necessarily obvious to the person
I
who's
see.
just starting their career, right? And even
Yeah.
somebody who's done this a bit, they may have worked for a non-product company. They've worked for a product company that's not based out of Seattle or the Bay Area. And trust me, the culture is very, very different in those parts of the world, right? So
Yeah.
there's always an element of learning. So if
Yeah.
you were to come to me, how would you initiate this conversation about a feature or a requirement?
Yeah. So, what feature are we talking about? Like how to set up this Kanban board?
Let's say we never had a Kanban interface, right? Let's presume that this product never had a Kanban interface. You
I
had
see.
to navigate and maneuver through this content through another way, like we're doing it right now, right? I'm just going to click on blocks or pods or whatever. But now
Hmm,
this is a new interface, right?
I see.
The same Tesla, Nvidia, and Meta are three cards. There are three blocks. In this
Mhm.
case, we just showed them as three different cards. In this case, it's a Kanban interface, right? So your intent is to come and tell me as a lead engineer that Krish, we need to, you talk to your customer, we need to implement a Kanban interface, right? Let's say this is where your conversation starts, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, Chris, we need to build this Kanban interface. Okay. So the way Kanban works, do you understand how Kanban works?
I'm going to say I understand a little bit, meaning I've used other products that have Kanban, but given that I've worked for our company for a bit, I don't exactly know what it means in the context of what it is that we're going to build here.
Yeah. So let me give you like a little bit of background on what we're gonna do and why we're doing it. So basically, right now we have these organized sprints that we kind of run, which have a set schedule. They're more well planned. But when we are dealing with some customer projects that doesn't have a certainty, or like there is a it lacks some planning because the volatility or prioritization can shift pretty quickly in some of the tasks there. That's why we want to keep a Kanban board option for such projects to run. Now the way the Kanban board works is that, yeah, we'll have bunch of tickets that are put into to do status, and then people can just randomly pick up those based on the prioritization. So any ticket that's higher in the priority, any developer wants to start working on something new, when they finish their existing task, they just go and pick it up. It doesn't follow the rigid structure of a sprint where we do sprint ceremonies and then grooming and planning, and then we do like demo towards the end of the sprint. If you're following a 2 week sprint pattern, this is more flexible from that perspective. It's actually very ideal for support or operational organizations because they don't really work towards building features. So we want to build this. But to build this feature, we will plan. Of course, our work is building feature, so we will plan some work out and sprints out. Does that make sense?
Makes complete sense. I'm going to play a few different roles as a typical lead engineer here, and these are
Hmm.
all not manufactured. Uh, it's not a hypothesis. It's situations that we've all been in, right? So I'm just going to share. I'm just going to play those roles, but these are real life situations. The first type of developer is going to be like, you know what, Siddharth, this is awesome. We've not built a big new feature in a little bit for a while, I should say. We've made some enhancements but not big features. This has a lot of stuff that we can do, so I'm stoked about it. So I'm going to be like, you know what, let's talk about requirements and dig deeper. Is one part of me as an engineer who does it. I'm going to take another extreme here, because that's the more challenging part here.
Yes, sir.
Siddharth, this is awesome. We're going to
Uh-huh.
be building this new feature. We're going to have Kanban. We're going to have a bunch of actions. Everything that we do outside of a Kanban interface, I presume you're going to want to support here. So I need to be able to edit this card, add attachments, checklists. So there's a number of different things we have to do to get this feature working. Now, before I ask you questions about the feature, before I understand why we need this, I'm going to tell you that we have a lot of bugs that we have yet to fix in our current implementation. We have a current sprint. We planned out the next 3 or 4 sprints. We know what to do, but there's a lot of bugs we have to fix. There's a lot of tech debt we have to address. We don't have the bandwidth to look at something new. I would love to look at this. I don't have the bandwidth to look at something new. So honestly, the team cannot even pick this up. So it's up to you as a product owner now to convince me in this case, saying, no, we have to do it, right? And the reason I bring this up is one part of me has an interest in learning why Siddharth came to the table with this requirement, because he went talk to the customer. The customer says, guys, without a Kanban board, I'm not even using the product. But here as a lead engineer, my focus is different. I want to fix my bugs. I want to fix my P1 and P2 issues. I want to fix, the tech debt that we've been carrying along for a while. So here's my concern, and this is where we come to a point, right? How do we pursue this conversation? If my mindset is pretty here, I'm sharing it with you because it's a podcast, right? So that, but in the real life, it'll be a little bit. It could be more animated. Okay, oh my God, you have a new requirement, new feature. I can't do this. We don't want to do this. We have a lot other fish to fry. What happens then?
Yeah, so again, this all goes back behind the rationale of why we are building the product, right? I always try to understand these things like, hey, what is the revenue proposition here? Is there a value proposition for us to build this today? Like, if I have a very solid reason to do it, as a owner, I would tell them, like, hey, we have these 4 customers who are looking for this in next 2 months to be able to roll out, and it has certain $1 million associated with that contract. I think it's a very good place for our company to achieve, like gain those. Otherwise, they will move on to other platforms, right? If they don't find it here, and there is a high probability that when they move, they might take the other business also, and we might be at the losing it. That can be one hypothesis there, right? Again, it depends on what the reality is. As a product owner, I'm hoping I know that there is a P1, P2 backlog, right? So when I'm taking this proposition with them, I've done my homework. I've identified what are the low hanging fruits. So, what is the high impact, low effort kind of work that we can plan, maybe as certain small capacity in parallel to planning this sprint, right? So that way we can continue on that backlog, but we don't have to achieve 100% of the backlog. So that's the part that a product owner needs to understand. No product is bug free, right? And not every bug needs to be prioritized. If you take a good look at it, a lot of times, a lot of P2s can also be P3s or P4s based on what is the impact radius of that ticket. So again, now it can be a really critical bug for one user, but I have say 10,000 users on my platform today, and it is only affecting like a 4 or 5 users really badly, but others don't have that issue because of whatever reasons. Then I don't need to prioritize that as a P2, right? So I think a lot of these kind of factors should play a role in prioritizing this backlog correctly. And then, because I don't know any, and I've seen like really like 50 people company to Amazon, which is like uh, hundreds of thousands of people. There's no company that does not have tech debt. So it's not like every problem has to be solved by solving tech debt. There is definitely value in doing it, but you have to know why are you investing money, because that is also a lot of investment. Sometimes I've seen companies to take completely 360-degree approach and building something completely brand new on a modern stack, and that saves them a lot more money than kind of improving the older product also. So again, these kind of considerations is what I'll try to play around to explain that. Now I'm doing 2 3 things. I'm telling them to think like an owner, right? Because this is where business is all about optimization, right? As a business owner, you're either thinking of what, either, hey, you want to spend more money on marketing, or you want to spend more money on hiring developers, right? Everything is a function of resources, and resources are always finite. There is nobody in the world has infinite resources. So as far as if you're using it to the best value, again, that's where the most impact of the work is. If they understand that, I think some of these questions can be addressed by that. Does it make
Okay.
sense?
No, it makes a lot of sense. I'm going to ask you more questions to make your life more difficult. So here the disagreement is not that development is questioning product, because we trust
Mm.
Siddharth and the team to know what it is that we should be building. But the conflict here, there's not so much a conflict of interest in that sense, but here's what I mean by the conflict. You're engaged with the customer, right? You're out there in the field figuring out what's going on. You have a competitive analysis done. You know what other products are building, where we should be in the near term, short term, and long term, and that's your job, and you're doing it beautifully and wonderfully well. Now, here's the problem from engineering standpoint. When you come back, and let's say in this case it's a new feature, so it's not the greatest example, because engineering teams do like this kind of stuff. So I'm going to let's play the opposite here, right? Let's say we were going to build a Kanban, and now you decided not to build it, because that would have been a better example, actually, to be honest with you. Because we were all stoked about building this new feature. The API team wanted to build all of these new bulk actions or APIs or graph or REST or whatnot. And now Siddharth is like, you know what, folks, we want to build this, but the customer now wants a bunch of bugs fixed. I'm just reversing it entirely from what I said 3 minutes ago, right? Let's table this feature for a bit and let's go fix these bugs. Now, what happens is, if you have an engineering team that's very excited about building something new, we understand the problem, we understand that we need to do what product says, but if fixing these bugs means we're going to push off this feature development for by 6 months, like
Yeah,
Siddharth, I'm spending 6 months of my time doing something I don't want to be doing, right? I'm
yeah,
going to quote Henry Thoreau here, like I do many a times. The price of anything is the amount of life you exchange for it. I know if you've seen this quote before. It's one of my favorite quotes. It's beautiful because, as part of what we do some consulting and managed services work. And when somebody calls me and says, Krish, this is a project that's long enough, and that's the first thing they tell me, I'm like, you know what? I don't know if that's the first thing I want to hear, because we have finite time on, just like you mentioned, finite resources, so that we have finite time on planet Earth. The idea here is not to pick up the lengthiest project and stretch it as much as you could so you could die at the end of that project, right? The idea here is to do as much as you can in the time we all have available on planet Earth, right? So that's the idea. So the engineering team is like, so that, I don't want to fix these bugs. We've been fixing bugs all the time. I want to build these new features, and now you're telling me I don't want to. We won't be able to build this for the next 6 months. That is going to be a very difficult conversation, right? That's a very difficult conversation because both of us agree that this is what the company needs, but yet it's not in the direct interest of our career. How do we? This is a typical problem we all run into at work. In your experience, how do you go about addressing this problem as a leader, not as a developer, not as an engineer, but wearing your leadership hat?
Yes, I've been in that exact situation, like exactly like 1 year ago. Okay. Um, so again, I'll wear my leader hat here because that's probably easier to wear at this situation when engineering is saying no. Of course, nobody wants to fix bugs for rest of their life. But to be honest, again, going back to the same thing, is our customer happy using our product? If they're not, we can build the other side now. Other extreme. We can build 100 new features. We can add as many as bells and whistles we want, and they would still not like the product because they already hate what they have. Why would they be looking to buy a newer version of it, right? It's like, and I think that's where so Amazon has this leadership principle called customer obsession. That's what they talk about. There is basically, if your end customer is not happy, then you are basically building everything for happiness of your end customer, and you kind of work backwards for that. Now when we start working backwards from what our customers will be happy with, and if the answer to that question is fixing bugs right now in the platform, then that is probably what we'll focus on. But what we'll try to do, I know that people are already invested in building this new feature, and if it is still our right direction that we want to still continue in, we don't need to stop discovery work. Yeah, we won't be hands on building that feature yet, but we can still do some design work or some templatization on the side. But my major focus when I plan my sprint work would be addressing these bugs in that case. But again, you scope the bugs. Again, you go back to that same. You look at your bugs and you see what is really a high impact, where we have the most pain point, which product areas have the most pain point, and let's go address that. If say that 1 month of work addresses 50% of my concern, that's the 1 month I want to invest in. And as soon as I have 50%, now I can go negotiate with my leadership. Okay, we already brought it to this level. Now we think, or say we had a time when we would have escalations every day. Now we've gotten to a place where we have maybe one escalation a month, right? I know I'm in a much steady place with our product. There is no perfect world. Hey, let's park it here. We'll keep investing small time on this, but let's start now going heavy on feature work. But those trade-offs can happen when you know that, hey, you've solved one problem. Like cleaning your house. When you clean your house, you don't go clean every corner of it, right? You first start with major things, right? If you see that there is the toys all over the floor, happens with us every day, we go first pick those bigger toys, right? And then we go ban the smaller items. So it's exactly like that. And then it doesn't have to be in one go. Once you've already cleaned the major parts of it, you can do it on a short basis. Every product team anyways have to have some time card of for customer support, right? There is no way an engineering team can say that they have zero time plan for any customer support activity. So none of this should be 100% surprise is what I'm saying. It should be already happening as part of. Now, how much equity you put on it in beginning can differ. And right now, the call of business is that for us to retain these customers, we'll have to solve these pain points. So let's go with the low hanging fruits. And then for others, we can start forming strategy. And there are some P4s. I've also worked on redefining SLAs, right? Sometimes the SLAs are unrealistic when they're sold contracts as contracts, right? So you redefine SLAs. Some of these bugs can easily qualify for something nice to have, and we can do it later, but it doesn't have to be done today. So every function has to work pretty closely on this. But for developers, I would try to give them all this context. In most cases, when I've been genuine in the information I've offered, people have agreed to support any cause that I wanted, right? That's how people rally behind you, is because you want trust with them, and they know that you also have best interest. So today you might not have this opportunity, but tomorrow when you have some cool project kicking off that would help them learn something new, you will make sure that they're taken care. Yeah.
One everything you're saying here is learning for different roles, because whatever you've said just now in the last few minutes is actually solid advice for product owners, for engineers, for engineering leaders as well. Because there's many things you mentioned, which I think if you go back and we're going to publish a transcript of this podcast as well, so for folks to
Mhm.
listen to it, these are important points, because it's sometimes easier. You know, it might sound like it's the obvious, Siddharth, but what I've seen is when you've lived through a certain pain or joy as well, it's more real, right? It's not just theory, because what you're telling us here, it's fairly obvious to me, and I'm sure to everybody else, that you've actually lived through this experience, right? It's not manufactured experience; it's a real experience. One of the things you mentioned there, let me get a bit deeper into that. You said customer obsession. Makes complete sense. What you're saying in a nutshell is, correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're saying in a nutshell, if I understand correctly, is understand what your customer wants and work to appease the needs of your customer, right? Makes a lot of sense. I'm going to take some dramatic examples here
Mhm.
to question that line of thinking. As much as I agree with the line of thinking, I'm going to take some dramatic examples, and I'll say one caveat before I go with the dramatic examples. Even though these names are going to be really big names, and people are like, you know what, you shouldn't even be using those names because they are really great people.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
important to understand that everybody's human. Everybody starts small. Everybody makes it big. You look at a Jeff Bezos video from like 25 years ago, you're like, oh my God, was he a developer just like a lot of us, right? It resonates with you. So I'm going to take these big names, but let's not get intimidated by these big names to question that the thinking behind customer obsession. I'm going to start out with a quote which is wrongly attributed to Henry Ford. Apparently, it's not Henry Ford's quote, but the number of times it gets attributed to Henry Ford, it seems like, sure, maybe he should get some credit for it. You may have heard this one before, read this one before. He said that if you ask customers what they wanted, they would have said faster horses, right? Not cars.
Yes.
That's one example. I'm going to leave you with a couple of them, and then ask you to speak to it, which is quite the opposite of customer obsession. So that's one thing. Two is, you see the early videos of Zuckerberg and what he shared of Facebook. It was a product he created while I think he was on campus as a student at Harvard. There's no research from what I can tell, right? They created something, he wrote some code, published it, saw what happened. 10,000 people used it. Next day, 100,000 people. Not doesn't happen to every product. 99.99% of products never see that, but that's still a fair example. So it's not product research. It's not customer obsession necessarily, because you don't even know what the customer wanted.
Yeah, yeah.
And the last example I want to give here, a couple of examples, is when Musk, with the event of last week, the person who's been in the news and is almost always in the news, and rightfully so. People are like, hey, you know what? Maybe we don't want the robo taxi. Maybe not yet. But we like the car. It looks pretty cool. It looks like a nice fusion between a Cybertruck and a Tesla 3. Can you just stick a steering wheel in this vehicle and sell it? Which
Yeah.
is, Tesla never wants to sell a cheaper Tesla 2 or something, right? These are a
True.
few examples that I've taken. I'm going to come up with an even more dramatic example. But out of these three examples, is it fair to say that these examples, if I said that these three examples go against the notion of customer obsession, Siddharth, is that correct, or am I just misunderstanding it?
So I think so. Facebook's example is very unique. Okay, Mark Zuckerberg, when he built Facebook, if I know the story, remember the story correctly, I think he just wanted to figure out, like, if you want data on the girls,
Yeah,
on other
absolutely.
dogs, how do you really know about it? Because there was no social media. So this is how they came up with. So everybody would input their data on it, and that automatically they'll figure out. So I think that's was his. So again, it was driven by a motivation. So there was a need that he wanted to solve for, right? It was his own need. Now, it doesn't have to be a customer's need, but he solved for a need that he himself was looking a solution for, and probably many other students in Harvard campus at that time were looking for that solution, but did not have a solution, right? So again, so customer obsession doesn't mean you stop innovating and you only listen to your customer what they're asking you to do. So customer obsession just means that your customer should be happy with what you're delivering to them. I think it's a little different than uh, they dictating what I should build. And most of the tech industry is built on this notion of uh, innovation, right? We don't build stuff that already existed 100 years ago. We've been constantly building and reinventing stuff. Like ChatGPT, who knew we needed ChatGPT, right? Like literally, very good example. Until it came, nobody knew they needed it, right? Today we use it like left, right, and center for every small thing in our life. So Again, so I think what you deliver. So when ChatGPT came out in our hands, not that we wanted ChatGPT to work a certain way, but when we started using it, did we feel happy about it, right? And I think that's the part. And did we enjoy that experience of using this now we wanted to do it again and again and keep coming back to it and keep using it again. I'm using ChatGPT as an example, but this is because very very new, right? So there is this model called challenger sales, okay, which talks, there's a book called Challenger Sales. It talks about the sales mindset also from that perspective, that you be the expert for the customer. So your customer doesn't know what they want, you tell them what they're looking for, you find their need, you fill the need, and you sell it. But in that process you are also kind of um, giving them an opportunity or something they never imagined. Versus the services model is the opposite way, where you tell me what you want and I'll build it for you, right? Like, and we have both sets of tech companies today. So I don't think the customer obsession is directly tied to we should be listening to our customer. We should be listening to their sentiment when they use our products. I think that's probably the differentiating factor here, at least. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. But for me to know whether you like something or not, right? Let's say you're going to be my potential customer. Siddharth is going
Mhm.
to be a potential customer. Snowpal's building something. Now I don't know what the customer obsession is because I haven't even built anything. Correct? I'm not doing this right. So I'm building a version. So are we saying then that you need to build? I'm thinking about as a startup, correct? I mean, just so a lot of folks are watching this are also early stage founders. So are we saying then that you build a version of whatever it is that you want to build, and put that in the hands of the customer to sort of assess what they like and dislike, right? Because if I don't have anything, then I have nothing to find out anything about.
Yeah. So that's the agility, right? That's where the agility of project management comes in. You keep building small. So there is this very famous mm, like a image I've seen where the wheel became a car.
Oh
You
yeah,
move
yeah, okay,
the
yep.
wheel and you show them the wheel, and then you from a wheel you build a unicycle. From that you go to a scooter, like keep progressing, and eventually it becomes a car. So that's the iterative development part of it. Now that's one way, right? Some people do iterative development like that. Some people with Apple, like Apple, can be extremely bold, and they launched a product called Vision Pro, and they didn't show it to anybody, right? And sometimes those product can be flop. Now I'm not saying that Apple Vision Pro is flop, it's very early,
I think
but
you can say that.
but it is pretty difficult to use, and it's extremely heavy. I've tried it myself, and after half an hour you cannot even keep that thing on your head.
Half an
So
hour, like after 2 minutes, you feel like there's a brick on your head. Yeah,
yeah, so
totally.
it's very heavy, right? But Meta came up with glasses, right? Very promising right now. From what I saw, it weighs 100 grams. uh, of course they didn't really build it mainstream yet, they only built few models, and I think each cost like 100K. So it's good for early inventors, adapters, to see what they can do with it. But that looks more promising product. Now Meta already has data whether there is interest in the market or not about it, and they will keep piling on that interest and keep building new stuff out of it, right? They've already opened the SDK, people will start building apps on it. So we are not too far from the Matrix world, where you can just see everything. Minority Report, actually, that's one of my favorite movies, but everything I see kind of, keep going back to that. But yeah, so innovation doesn't need to wait for somebody's validation, right?
Okay.
Innovation is a measure of failure. You keep trying things, and some will work, some baits will work, and some baits will not work, right? That is basically what innovation is, and that's why most companies, like tech companies, believe in that fail fast culture. So they keep failing fast, so that when they keep failing fast they become successful somewhere, right? And Google has done it with thousands of products that they deprecated now, but they also have some very successful products, right? And Microsoft has done it too. um, and all
So which means
Amazon is also like that, right? Amazon had Fire phones at one point in time, extremely bad product, but
the
they learned a lot of lessons from it and they stopped it immediately. Yeah.
so which means fair points. I agree with most of what you said there. Can we say then that when you're looking to start a company or when you're looking to grow in your career, it's very human, I think, at least if you ask me, to look for certain examples of other people who've done this before us, who've been successful. So we try to follow a path because it's like sort of a design pattern, right? You don't want to reinvent the wheel. That's why we hopefully read the Gang of Four, all these design patterns when you're building software. But the challenge that is life is doesn't fit into a design pattern. At
Yeah.
least, if as we get older, at least I'm realizing it, life happens, right? Like you mentioned at the top of this call. So which means, even though you look at these examples, those examples work for those people. Now you're going to have to take that with a grain of salt. I think Jensen Huang said that for many years they built something, right? The chip where the customer wanted it cheaper. They actually went back and did even better. It was more expensive. They actually did quite the opposite for many years. Now that they've become, I think as we're talking, they are the second largest company, like $100 billion behind Apple. Tomorrow morning they might very well be the biggest company out there. So
Yeah.
it's easier said than, you could say this now. Hey, obviously Jensen Huang is running the world's largest company, he knows it. But as humble as all of these people come across, if you go back to the previous videos, you would see them being not so sure about certain things and being a bit more sure about other things. So, what I'm trying to say in a long winded manner is there a design pattern at all? Or are we trying to establish a pattern that cannot exist? Meaning, sometimes you have to be obsessed about the customer. Sometimes you have to be obsessed about your own engineering needs as an engineer. Sometimes you have to be obsessed about your product management team. Sometimes you have to be obsessed about your investors' interests. So, is that obsession, does it have to be loose enough so you cannot actually tell who you need to be obsessed about? As long as you're obsessed about something, hopefully there is success somewhere down the road. As long as there is obsession, but not obsession towards a certain thing in particular.
Yeah, so there's no pattern, right? It really depends on what situation you are in. I think you summed it up already in your question. The answer is, what are you really trying to solve for? If you're solving for your investors' interest, then you would have to follow, because say if you're really bottlenecked on money and you need more money, and right now only way to get money is that your investors are happy with you so they can pump in more money in your startup, right? That's the only way it would function. So yeah, you would have to optimize for their interest. But if you're solving for innovation and you want to bring a product that nobody has ever seen or thought of, right? Again, most small companies don't take that kind of bets, right? The companies that can take these kind of bets are companies that are already established in at least one or two markets, and that's why they're able to take these bets, because they know their business won't go down if this doesn't work. Like
Right.
Apple or Amazon, for an example, that's why they can take this very risky bets. um, or Meta, for an example. But there are other companies that probably would not be in a shape. Like I work for a startup right now, right? We have very good amount of funding, but still I don't think Medible as a company can take risk of building something completely different that nobody has thought of, right? What we are trying to innovate is within the clinical research space. So within the clinical research space, we know there are like a number of problem, like n number of problems that exist. We are trying to see how we can do innovative technology solutions for those problems. So we're still building something that people have not used today, right?
Okay.
Or are used to do today. But when they see it, they like it, because hey, if say certain process took them a month, now they can do it in a day, right? That's basically the achievement we are trying to solve for. Then, so again, where are you innovating and what are you optimizing for is always going to differ based on industry space and your other environmental dynamics, I would say, right? How much money you have, how much risk you can take, and all those factors. So yeah, I don't think there is a pattern that fits for one pattern that would fit all. Everybody has their own journey, and I think that journey would keep changing with time. Say if you have early success and you're making 100 million now in your startup, now your journey will be different than where you started, right? So even your design, whatever pattern you want to follow, would be completely different. You'll have some confidence, your investors will have some trust in you now. Now can you take a risky bet? Maybe yes, right? Before that it's probably very difficult, but now that you've shown that you can do $100 million revenue in a year, maybe they would be willing to take some risk with you, right?
Makes complete sense. So let's say as you work, we progress in our careers, we work for different companies, we probably run different companies. We go from one to the other, build different products for different industries, different geographical regions. So a number of things change, the teams change, the software changes, uh, a lot of things change. So we agreed that the design patterns, you have to take them with a grain of salt. But as these things change, right, so that if you have to tell people, if somebody's asking you, hey, in your experience, in your career, what is the common thread you've seen between, given that all of these things can be different and varied between jobs and companies and organizations, what is the single common thread that has defined success? Meaning, like, all successful people that you've worked with, even though they've worked on different products at different times, have had different challenges, you've sort of found these patterns. These are the traits that I've found in these people or in these companies. What are some of those things that you could share with this, that you've like, what, even if hell broke loose and everything else did not work, if I spot these types of things in companies and people I work with, I want to stay close because I know good things can come because of that. Maybe a process, maybe a methodology, maybe an attitude, whatever it is. What would some of those things be?
Yeah, so it again depends, different industry it differs. If I talk about people, the common thread I've seen, people are most accountable. I've seen like they have highest level of ownership towards their job are usually the one you will always see succeeding because they are doing their 110, not 100% in their job. And I think that's probably the biggest differentiator in most people who are individually successful. Okay. And then when it comes to organization, I think the organization that are most tolerant to failures are also the one. So nobody has to build like a big VR gadget, right? But within your space, right, you know how much risk you're taking in terms of that your everyday, how much you're trying to improve your tech stack, or how better your code is, or you're trying to increase some code coverage on a daily basis so your app has a better stability. Anything you're doing that's a little bit more than what you've done, and in that process sometimes you succeed, sometimes might delay project, but if your intention was right and what you did was still valuable in long term, right, it has to be honored to some extent. And I've seen organizations who do that, like they have this culture of tolerating failure to some extent, not in a bad way. If somebody is not performing their job, that's not called tolerating failure,
Right.
right? Yeah, if somebody is basically bogging down the entire team and slowing down everybody's pace because that person is not performing, is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the other way, like, hey, I tried something new on side and this is what I built, and maybe this will work or not work, but at least I did something beyond my normal expected duties, right? And so individually I've seen like I was talking about, people who have highest level of ownership are always successful no matter where they go. These are the people mostly the best to associate with because they're always driven by an objective, right? They are motivated in life to do good, and it's not because they're going to get paid better, it is just because they want to do good. And this is and then the organizations that have value in letting people innovate and try and fail, I think they generally are more successful. The other way is like if it's a fear driven culture, it normally starts plateauing pretty fast eventually. Yeah.
Very, very important points that you mentioned there. One of the things I want to ask you is of what you just mentioned there. So that is, so there are certain personality traits, right? Your commitments, your diligence, and how a number of passion, a number of things you mentioned that define individual success and group success as well. Now, in your experience, are those things different based on location? Because we are all human, right? If I'm committed, if I'm really hardworking in DC, and if I'm hardworking in Seattle, I should be equally successful. At least on paper, theoretically so. It doesn't matter if I'm in Bangalore, if I'm in any of the other places that I just mentioned, just cities, it shouldn't make a difference. Yet, in my experience, I've seen that it has been different. But before I share that, I want to get your thoughts. If you took the same person who had the exact same attitude and personality, be a developer, a product manager, CTO, whatever their role is, a tester, or a DevOps engineer, and you took them from one place, one location, and moved them to another location, are they going to be, assuming citrus paribus conditions, right? Now, a number of other things change, but let's assume, keep it simple. Let's assume none of the other things change. Do you expect them to be successful at the same level, or have you seen other factors that can potentially come into play here?
It's a very interesting question. At meta level, I feel there should not be any difference because we're talking about an individual's ability. We're not talking about the skill set that's going to change because the location changes. Um, Now, life can be very different for them when you move them from one place to the other. I don't know what factors, but let me ask you this follow up question. When you're saying success, are you attributing to just like how much money they're making, or no? You're just talking about their ability to perform the job.
Wow, you're asking a very difficult question. I'm going to take a stab at answering that question. It's
Right.
a brilliant question, but it's a very difficult question. I wish I had asked you the question so I didn't have to answer the question. It's easier for me to have asked the question. But I say success as whatever your metric is, right? In your case, not your, by you, I don't mean you, I'm saying in someone's case, success could be growing within an organization, right?
Mhm.
Manager, director, senior director, VP, senior VP, and whatnot. Like your titles are growing. For somebody else, success could be the the scope of work you're working on. Like for me as a developer, that's very important for me.
Correct.
The technology is changing. If there is a new technology in the market today that I've not ever worked on, like let's say I've not done any meaningful work using CUDA at this point of time.
Mhm.
If you give me a project that's a fair bit of money, that's TypeScript code or Golang, I love Golang, but one of those languages we've used in the past, and you gave me lesser money, but it actually had to do with us building software on CUDA,
Mhm.
we would pick that up in a heartbeat. That would be success for us because someone trusted us in building something else. For
Yes.
somebody else, it could be neither a title nor the technology, it's just a lot more money, right? Hey, you know what? I'm going to get a 30% bonus.
Yeah.
So there could be a number of different things, but let's keep that out of the picture. Whatever success is for that person, I'm asking this question for a reason, but I'll share that reason with you after we have had this conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
If that whatever that success is, if you move from one place to the other, very specifically geographically, right? Because people move. I'll give you an example without giving you an answer away. I'll give you an example. Night Shyamalan, right? One of my favorite directors.
Mhm.
I happened to run into him actually in DC last year. So he lives in Philadelphia, if I'm not wrong, right? Uh, he makes brilliant movies. He makes his own kind of movies, but he makes brilliant movies, and I love him for many reasons. One is he
Mhm.
happens to, he looks like one of us. You know what I mean? Uh,
Absolutely.
uh, and it's amazing that he's not an engineer. It's nothing against engineers,
Yeah.
but it's nice to see somebody who looks like you was not a developer, right? It's awesome. It's very refreshing. So I love movies and I love Night Shyamalan. And I bring up this example to that because he didn't relocate to Los Angeles, right? To LA, where most people make cinema.
Yeah.
He lives in Northeast in Philadelphia, and he's making great movies. Now that to me told me every time I wanted to relocate to build software to the Bay Area or to Seattle, my wife is like, Krish, hasn't Night Shyamalan lived where he lived, and does he not make great movies? So I'm sure Snowball can continue to build great products by not relocating, right? That's the reason. It's one of the reasons I popped this question. There's other reasons. So I want to take somebody who was not sure about relocating. Maybe they live in India. Maybe they want to come here. They
Yeah.
want
Yeah.
to be as successful as they are,
Mhm.
whatever success means to them, but they are not sure about relocating themselves because it's a big step in life. And I have people ask me all the time, should I move to DC? Should I move to Boston? Should I move to Austin? Because Tesla moved to Austin, Oracle moved to Austin, or should I move to the Bay Area? Should I move to Seattle? So I want to get your thoughts as an engineering leader on what does it mean? Do you believe that they can sort of more specifically be successful at the same level, or are there certain challenges that you've experienced or somebody's experienced that they have to be aware of before they make these types of changes?
So I think one biggest difference that I have felt, okay, I'll tell you just difference between, because I've lived 10 years in Bay Area and then I moved to Seattle 3 years ago. Okay, I'll just tell you the difference. In Bay Area, it is a lot about startup culture. So even though Bay Area has some of the biggest companies, right, already, it also has some of the largest and most successful startups also, right? You be it Airbnb, Uber, Lyft, like you can think of so many names, and Bay Area has them. So Bay Area definitely has a very different vibe. Also, like as part of my MBA program, I met a lot of people who were part of this incubator programs where they were incubating startups and helping raise funds and stuff like that, right? So I think in your day-to-day life, your ability to hang out with people like that is just extremely common, right? You won't have to find for these people. You would very easily walk into a party where you don't know anybody and you'll end up talking to two three startup entrepreneurs. Okay. Versus Seattle, even though Seattle is also a tech hub, it's very different. Seattle is not known for, oh, like there are hundreds of startups coming out of Seattle, right? There are some really large corporations here: Expedia, Costco, Starbucks, Amazon, Microsoft, right? And then there are other companies like T-Mobile and stuff. But again, it's not a startup hub. So I can see the difference just here. I'm not even talking about making money part. I'm just telling about the association part. So was I more inspired when I was in Bay Area versus here? Yes. right? If that inspiration works in motivation to do something bigger, might be, I don't know how human psyche works for every single person, but did that make any difference in my ability to work individually? My answer would be no. So if I just really think of my level, did my work style change or my ability to contribute change because I moved? Answer is no. um, Bay Area, in fact, I was commuting a lot. I was spending like 2 hours in commute every day, right? I'm not commuting now. So my quality of life has increased. So probably I'm more productive even if I'm working less. So I think that that is the part where I don't know. And again, this is Seattle. If I move to say DC, I don't know how the world would be. It might be very different there. But I think the association help, right? Like this is a principle you learned from childhood, right? Associate yourself with the kind of people you want to be. So I think that's more easier in these hubs. Here also, like everybody I know today works for Meta or Amazon or Microsoft, right? It's automatically I am getting to whatever they are doing. I at least have
Right.
some hearsay, advice, not advice, but I have some hearsay on exactly what kind of stuff they're
Mm.
working on or what they are doing different today than they were a year ago before the whole AI revolution started or stuff like that. So I think that is probably the only differentiating factor. Um, Now, when you think of this from somebody coming from extremely like a remote place like India, I think that's completely different because there is a lot to take in life. I have some of my very close friends, extremely smart, doing really good in India, don't want to come to US because they don't want to disrupt what is going on. Like they don't want to change the familiarity. They want to, because for them, in fact, staying in India, they think they have more ability to try different things out versus coming here because they all laugh. There's like, oh, if I come there, I'll be cleaning dishes. So again, everybody has a different perspective. Um, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but
No, no, you are answering the question beautifully. So, right? I just want to have here the
I
whole.
think it's a huge difference. It's like who are you associating with? Like
No,
India,
I
you
think
would,
you gave some very good examples because the two examples you took, Seattle, someone who lived in the Bay Area and Seattle, it kind of struck a chord with me even as somebody who doesn't live there because I've worked with a lot of companies, my clients in California, primarily in the Bay Area, and I worked with some in Seattle, and I could tell the difference in culture. As somebody who doesn't live there but worked with those teams, I could tell. I've
yeah,
lived here long enough most of my life, so I can tell the subtleties and the differences as well. Sometimes the differences are not so subtle; they're pretty stark, remarkably different. And if you did move to the DC area or visit area like so that, you'll realize it's very, very different. It's like 180 degrees different. So the reason I asked the question is I've had people ask me, and actually, you sort of read my mind there, or you said something I was going to ask you, which is I was going to talk about India, a little bit because there's a number of our listeners or watchers also, live in India, in Delhi, Bangalore, and some of the metropolitan cities. So when people hit me up on LinkedIn and ask me, I need to say move to the US to work on something cool. My first answer is my first question generally is okay, I'm not sure I understand the question because do you want to move to the US or do you want to work on something cool? Because they are mutually exclusive questions. They
yeah,
have nothing to do with each other. You could be wherever you are and build stuff that's really, really cool. So it's not the location that makes a difference. But the reason I asked this question to you is people have this misconception. And that's why I
yeah,
took the example of Shyamlan, Night Shyamalan, right? That you have to be a certain place, you have to have a certain amount of money, you have to have a certain kind of tool or a certain kind of experience to be able to do whatever it is that you're intending to do. So as we wrap up this part, one of my last set of questions to you is, software is a beautiful field for many reasons. One of it is you don't need to have a ton of money to build software, right?
absolutely. Yeah,
If you want to start a factory, a chemical factory, or I had family who have few factories back in India, and a lot of that requires a lot of money as investment. The thing about software is it doesn't need a lot of money, right? If you're a developer, you just need a machine, right? $1,000 and you can be on your way. But people still believe that, hey, I maybe I don't have the experience, maybe I don't have the money, maybe I don't have the background, maybe I don't have a rich parent, whatever
yeah,
it is those reasons are, for me to try whatever it is that I'm going to try. I want you to sort of speak to it. And I took India as an example, not for any other reason.
mm,
It's because, in my experience, a lot of these questions have come from folks who live there. That's not to say that this question is specific to India. This question is rather generic. But before I fine tune my question, if you don't mind me asking, I know you mentioned you're from India. Which part of India are you from, Siddhar?
Pune.
Oh, you're from Pune. Okay, I come from the south, right? I come from Chennai. So Pune is an awesome city as well. So, and it's a tech city too, right? It's a tech city as well. So if somebody is watching and listening to this from Pune and they're like, hey, Siddharth surely is a really smart person. There's no two ways about it. 45 minutes into it, I'm like, I would fail an interview if Siddharth was the interviewer. But let's say I'm not that smart, or maybe I don't have all these resources. I don't have all this wonderful experience that Siddharth has, but I do want to become good engineer. I don't want to become a good product owner. I want to become a good product manager. I want to become a good tester. I want to become a good something in a software company. What is it that you could tell them if they're, we have to assume that not everybody has access to everything, right? And I've seen these videos, documentaries recently where there are a lot of brilliant people. And I always tell my mom this, and sorry, my question is long winded, but I always tell my mom this. The only thing that separated me from somebody else who's actually probably, I don't know, riding an auto rickshaw in India, right? Or a tuk tuk, as most people have in the US happen to know it as. Not many things. Maybe I had a father or a mother who had some money to put me in a school and I was able to go to a college and I graduated. That singularly could be the only difference. I
Yeah.
don't think there's any intellectual difference at all because I talked to people. I was in a cab the last time I was in India, and I was like, I told the cab driver, I was like, dude, thank God I didn't have to compete with you, and I was applying to for my visa because I would have lost it. Thankfully, you didn't compete with me, that I could get in, right? Because there was no difference whatsoever. So it's intellectually I couldn't see any differences, but people think that, oh my God, Krish, are you really smart? I know I always tell them if I can. People have told me, if Krish, you can do it, I'm sure I can do it, and I take that as a compliment. I take that as a compliment. What can you tell people who feel intimidated about getting started or trying it? What is it? Maybe it's a personal experience of that, or not a personal experience. What is it that you can share with us and them and people that would inspire people?
Yeah. Um, I can share my personal experience also, and then I'll tell you what I've seen other people like do it also. First of all, I am not the smartest engineer that you would find. I'll be very honest, right? I didn't go to IITs, right? I don't even remember how bad my JEE score was. Okay. All I'm trying to say is that first of all of this are really important things. Like if you're smart enough to get into IIT, of course you should get into IIT. No questions about it. No two ways about it. But that is not the only defining criteria for your life, and that's how it works for everything else. My first job I landed was not on a campus interview because the college I did engineering did not have campus interviews. So my first job I landed was actually, I basically printed like stack of resumes and I went door to door. So in Bombay there is an area called Seeps which has bunch of tech companies. I literally went door to door dropping my resume, and watchman would not even let me go in. So I would give my resume to the watchman, but I would make sure I talk to him nicely. I build enough connection so that there is some chance that he would actually pass it on to
Right.
somebody meaningful. That was my only goal with that, and that's how I landed my first job. When I landed my first job, I took it pretty seriously. Um, Back in college when I learned, of course we didn't learn anything. My first Java job was as a Java developer, and I had to learn all this that time supposed to be cool things like EJBs and J2E. I had no clue what those things are, right? So I had to really work my ass off in first 2 3 months to kind of get used to do this skill, because everybody else already knew this. Because most people who um, were probably better prepared than I was, were had already done during their summers. They had done these Java coachings, which I did not go to, or they had done these EJB trainings that I did not have, or I didn't have access to. Nobody told me. It wasn't money. If somebody would have told me do it, I would have done it actually. But nobody told me because I come from families of doctors. Nobody's engineer, so my guidance on engineering was zero. I did everything pretty much on myself. Uh, I think as I worked through that job, I realized that this job is good, but I want to do something more. That's when I started, right? I wanted to be part of that journey. I didn't want to just do the development, and I didn't see much prospects in that role. So I switched job to a role which basically allowed me. So I worked with a company called Saba Software, which actually allowed me to explore like this end-to-end process. Like, okay, you build a feature and you can go implement it also. Because those days it used to be you have to go manually install it to somebody's computer, or
Right.
at least on the server. And I did that, right? Which most engineers would not do, because that was considered pretty mediocre actually in my time. Like, oh, you're doing deployment, you're not doing that. But I did both because I wanted to learn. So through which I actually got in, one of my customers uh, was so impressed when they had one critical project starting, they basically made a contract with my product company that they would do this only if they send me on site
Wow.
to do that project. But again, see, I didn't do anything like significantly different. I just did my job very well during those days. It's pretty easy if you do your prescribed part and you keep decent relationships with people. I never, at least by will, underestimated anybody's work or stepped on anybody's toes. So everybody who worked with me always thought of me as a nice person to work. Right? That was my only claim to fame. If I get full merit on anywhere, that was my only thing that I wanted to get full merit on. And I think that's where the trust, earned trust I was talking about comes in picture. I made sure I earned trust of people and peers and people I collaborate with. And then I came to US, and that's the journey how I came to US. And then after I came here, of course, I wanted to now work for a US based company because that was easier, for not easier, sorry, that was the right progression towards my
Right.
goal. It was easier to achieve my long term dreams,
Mhm.
like getting in the right companies and stuff. But so every time I worked, when I was working as a developer, so when I was a lead in Saba, but when I switched roles, like from a sort of Indian company to a
Right.
US proper 100% US startup, they didn't give me a lead role, right? They hired me as a software engineer, and I had to again work through the progression. So see, again, I had no ego there, like you were talking about. If you get to do something new, would you take it for less money? It was very much like that. Like I just wanted to make sure that this, if it aligns with my long term growth, then I would do it, and that's what I did. So again, and I haven't like I don't know people. Today is much easier. Like I was telling you about, right? When I read Java, I had to read through books. When I did J2E, we had to buy these big, thick books, this complete reference guides, and we would read. And every time you get stuck, you would basically go. My wife and I were laughing. My wife is a developer too, so we were laughing like how we used to refer Java doc for everything when we built something. Nowadays, you have IDEs that are so smart, you can just go.
Right.
So it's a lot more easier and successful. I i had to write date translating functions based on different time zones at one of my jobs. I was telling my wife, if I tell that somebody today that I had written these utilities on date conversions, some people would laugh at it because nobody has to do that today, right? It's all inbuilt in
Right.
libraries and everything. So it's a lot more easier to do actually much more impactful work today. And there is YouTube. For YouTube has almost content for everything you want to learn today. I don't even think you have to pay money to do it. So even if somebody, the degree is the only part you have to control. If you have a decent degree, if you don't have money, I have friends I know who didn't have money to go to like a big engineering college.
Mhm.
Took They did degrees in their local whatever private colleges or government colleges they could get done. They just did the degree, and later on they just built all the skills by themselves because college doesn't teach you anything, right? Everything you learn after on the job.
You know, sorry, continue.
No. So that's what my summary was. It is, if I can do it, everybody can do it because, like I said, at the very beginning, okay, I'm not the smartest engineer. I'm probably a very good people manager. That's what I learned, my strength. But I had to work for 10 years to understand what my strengths are. So it didn't come naturally to me to know what my intuitions are and how to leverage them. So again, everything comes back to that fact that keep doing things that are there in front of you, and then if you're honest with those, it will lead to other opportunities, right? The people will remember.
Siddharth, beautifully summarized. I'll say my takeaway was two things from there. I'm convinced, right? It's not that I had any doubts at the top of the call, but I'm even more convinced. Two things is you're a very humble person, which is very obvious during the last 60 minutes of talking to you. And two is even if you say that you're not the smartest engineer, you are a very smart person. It's there's no question about that. And I'll tell a lot of our audience is pretty much predominantly in the US. They do know of a lot of the things you mentioned, like the college. But for folks who don't know, I'll say it. So this is kind of funny. So folks, Siddharth started that answer. If I paraphrase what you said, that I didn't go to, I'm not one of the smartest engineers. I didn't go to IIT. The thing I was laughing, I just didn't laugh aloud here. So the college that Siddharth picked there is, I want to say, hands down the most difficult place anybody could ever get into. And I think I read a report recently. It's harder to get into IT than it is to get into Harvard, Stanford, MIT, and all of these Ivy League schools in the US, as much as far as I know. So Siddharth's example was, I didn't go to IIT, so I'm not a smart engineer. So you know what that means, right? So take that with for what it is. But I want to say, uh, what you mentioned there, some of the things I just want to quickly recap is you said that you said commitment, and you alluded to passion many a times there, right? You said you worked hard, you started your career in India, and then you came here. You had to sort of go back to the drawing board and start being from a developer and work your way through the ladder there. So the takeaway for me there, and I can speak to it personally as well, so that is I never, I don't know if chased is the right word, chase titles, because it never resonated with me as a person. It didn't mean anything to me. Much like grades in college didn't mean much to me. It's not an excuse. They honestly didn't mean much, even though the actual grades are a reflection of what they meant to me, but actually they truly didn't mean much. Uh, and when I talk to people, I've had people ask me, even my own parents, like, you've been doing this for so many years. So the title should not change. I thought it changed. You're a developer. They don't know what it is, but it's got to be something different. Because I tell them after 25 years, I'm still a developer. They're like, that doesn't make any sense. How could you be a developer after like 25 years? It's something's got to change. I mean, do you not know what you're doing, right? It's funny because they ask me, but it brings the humor, right? Because some of us just enjoy what we do and we don't want to do anything else for that matter, right? So I want to tell people, just whatever you said there was very beautifully awesome, meaning you don't have to go. If you go to IIT, good for you, right?
Yeah,
Nothing wrong. Sundar Pichai did. A lot of the other people who run companies in the US did.
yeah,
But a lot of the Indian people who run companies in the US, they didn't go to IITs in
yeah,
as well, right? So it doesn't matter where you go to school. It doesn't matter what you do, as long as you do it well and you're committed to what it is that you're doing. That's my only advice that I would add to what you just said. Even though it's no different, I would say you have to be very passionate about what you do, and you cannot let age or a company or money or the bureaucracies of an organization mellow you down. Because even today, if you showed me code that was not even code that I wrote like maybe a month ago and said, Chris, this is not good, I wouldn't be offended, right? I would be like, hey, Siddharth, that's awesome. Can you tell me how should I be doing it better? How should I be doing it differently? Because by virtue of being defensive, I'm not learning. And
yeah,
I completely blew an opportunity to learn from Siddharth, right? That's
yeah,
my loss. It's not Siddharth's loss. So
yeah,
I think that's the only thing I would say. Just saying it a little bit differently is, if you blow an opportunity to learn from somebody who's better than you, and almost every time you enter a room, there is somebody who's better than you, somebody who's like way better than you, right?
oh,
So you have to grab that opportunity with both your arms. And if you end up in that room where you are the smartest one because it happened for whatever reason, my only advice is get the hell out of that room, right? You don't want to be there. That's the wrong room, because the
mm,
whole world is made up of people who are way better than you are. So you don't want to be in this place. So this was awesome, right? Everything you said, from leadership and the humility of you sharing your experiences was great. Before we end this call, I have a customary way of sort of breaking the ice, but by the time I end the podcast, I almost always end up feeling like I know the person enough, even if they were complete strangers at the top of the call. So I have two things to ask you. One is, before I ask you the second thing, which is not a technical thing, do you have any questions for me, Siddhar? I know I've been throwing these questions at you and making life difficult, but do you have anything to ask of me?
no, yeah. What's your journey has been like? What was the biggest thing that made you start this podcast? Like starting a company and you're doing a lot of work through Snowpal is very different than doing the podcast. This needs a different muscle. What prompted you to do this?
Great question. So we are a small startup, right, based out of the DC area, and we built a few different products, and I'll share those links with you. As part of the journey, I'd built software for a lot of companies for a lot of time. I used to work for Oracle for many years. I thoroughly enjoyed my job. I quit Oracle because I enjoyed it so much that I was worried that I'll never quit this company or the team. I suddenly woke up one day thinking, oh my God, I'm getting so comfortable here that I like what I do and like the people. This
Yeah.
is it. I'm going to retire here. Like, I'm going to be 70 years old and I'll have some title at Oracle and I'll retire. And that scared the heck out of me. I'm being honest with you. So I decided, what, I'm going to quit. I didn't have another job. I'm just quitting because I was too comfortable. And then I called my parents and I told them, they're like, oh my God, you quit your job and you don't have another job and you quit Oracle? I'm like, I don't know, I'm going to apply for some other small company. And I don't know, my parents are very typical Indian parents, since I'm Indian, I can throw them under the bus. They like this brand. They like to say where I went to college, where I worked, things that meant nothing to me meant a lot to them. So they freaked out, but you know what? I was married. I couldn't worry about. I was more worried about my wife freaking out than my parents freaking out. So I'm like, you know what? Freak out all you want. So I started working for these smaller companies because I wanted to know how things were outside of this large company. What if you didn't have a lot of money? What if your team didn't have a lot of time and money and resources and all the people from Stanford and the ITs that I ended up working with? That
Yeah.
was very uncomfortable for me because I want to build software with regular people. I mean, I'm not saying people from ITs and Stanford not regular,
Yeah.
but regular people like me, right, building software, right? So I was like, you know what, let me work in smaller companies. So I wanted to work for startups. Working for a startup is awesome if you're in the right part of the country, which is why I asked about location.
True.
Looking
True.
for a startup in the DC area is not easy. It was not easy then, it's not that easy now either. So I had to look for startups, you have to make a lot of effort. I worked for a company that was in New York City, but I had an office here and stuff like that. But this was all effort and initiative I took. I could have chosen to be comfortable at Oracle,
Mhm.
just work there, beautiful team, they paid decent amount of money, great people, but that was, what is comfortable to one person is not comfortable to another person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nobody in my team had left there, they were working there for many years, so I quit. Fast forward many years, right? I told myself I'll only work for small companies. I enjoyed working for companies that had very little money. To the point, I'll tell you, people give me a call. They're sitting at Einstein Bagels. I don't know if you have Einstein Bagels in like Seattle is one of the bagel places that I go to all the time here. So it's one of the it's a national chain. I don't know if they have it in Seattle though. So they
Uh,
have good bagels and coffee. At least they used to have. So I get a call from somebody saying, "Hey, I need you to. Can you build something for me?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure. I can meet you up there." I don't know them. I go drive my car, go all the way there. I'm like, this is very interesting, but I got the read that they didn't get funded or had decent amount of money. I was like, how much money do you have? This is a person who's never built software, never
mm.
ever built software, never worked in a software company. They just had a nice idea. They want to get somebody to build it for them, right?
Okay.
They're like, I have like five. They said 5 to 10. I was like, 5 to 10 million. That's a good amount of money. They're like $5 to $10,000.
Dollars.
I was
Oh.
like, did I hear this right? I'm like, I'll go back to my question again. No, I think you don't understand my question. I was like, how much money do you have to build this piece of software? $5 to $10,000 saved up, Krish. Can you build it for me? I was like, oh my God, this is, it was reality for them and for me too. I
Yeah.
quit Oracle and I'm now trying to build software for people. And now people have like $10,000. They want to build. I'm like, you can build software for $10,000, but you got to do all of it yourself, right? You can hire somebody to do it. Certainly not in the US. Maybe another part of the world, possibly. I don't know, but not in the US, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
this is my first experience. Now, did I reject this outright? Not really. You'll be
No.
surprised.
You
It's not
needed
the
one.
money. It's
Yeah.
not the money at all. It's $10,000 doesn't do anything, right?
Yeah. It's the opportunity.
You're a stupid developer who likes to build software, right? So I started building software for very little money. At one point, my wife was like, Krish, this is going to be like a not for profit charitable organization. Are we actually going to make real money here, right? I'm like, we will. Hopefully one day, right? But there is a journey. And you ask me about journey, this is literally my journey. And somebody watching this, I'm not making any of this up. So years went by, and we built small prototypes, hired people to extend our prototypes, correct? It was bootstrap funded. We would build a page, give it to somebody to build a couple of pages. Now, sorry, this is a long answer. I don't know if you want me to keep going here. I'm boring you to death. So that does it make sense?
It's very interesting story. Yeah.
Okay. So then we built a page, we built another page. I thought doing it part time would be all right. So I did a job and I saved some money and I put some money. I spent some time building the software, gave it to somebody else to extend this. I listened to NPR, not as much now than in the past. And I wish I had listened to that radio, that one session 5 years before I ended up doing. Someone asked the guy, what is the one thing you would tell people that they shouldn't be doing if they want to build a company, whatever company it is?
Mhm.
His advice was, do not do it part time. I'm like, what? That doesn't make any sense. I'm doing it part time. That's what I've been doing it for the last 5 years. He repeated it 3 times and he gave a beautiful answer. He said, no matter what you do, try to do it full time and you're going to thank me later. I would thank him every single day of my life because I did this part time for so long. We kept moving along, but never went live. For whatever reason, we never saw the light of day. And I kept asking myself, what am I doing wrong? I know how to build software. I've seen like 50 clients of mine go live with their product. I can't go live with one product of my own. What am I doing wrong? And then I realized I was doing it part time. And then in 2019, I said, you know what? I quit Oracle years ago. My parents were upset. This time I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to have no money, right? I'm just going to do this full time, right? 9 months later, we went live with our first version of our web application. And then fast forward 5 years, we have 100 challenges today, but we have many versions of our web app gone live, like 200 versions of it has gone live. We have a mobile app, 200 versions of our mobile app has gone live. And
That's awesome.
our API B2B product, we have 8 APIs with like 1,300 endpoints that went live. But I can tell you one thing, Siddharth, I was blessed to work with a lot of smart people all my life, even in my own team, but I had to do it full time to see things happen. I don't know why, but that was the crux of. So if somebody forgets everything I've rambled about here, please take this seriously. If
Yeah.
you're, and I'm sure you're a whole lot smarter than I am, right? So you can do it part time and still pull it off. But if you're like me, you will need to do this full time because doing it part time simply does not work for n number of reasons. So, on top of all the advice that Siddharth actually has given here and the experience that Siddharth shared, the one little thing I would add is the non technical advices. You might want to seriously consider whatever it is that you're doing full time if you actually want to see things happen. But maybe life is different for you that you could see it happen. But I
Mhm.
don't know if this makes sense, Siddharth, but that is my honest to God true
I've heard
experience
from
of.
so many of my friends who've done their startups or businesses. Yeah, it cannot be done part time. Like I've heard this advice, like golden. What you said just kind of foolproofed it for me. But yeah, most people I've heard talked to who've been successful, not starting out. That's the biggest differentiator, right? They have quit. So one thing I've heard is like you have to burn the back bridge. That's the only way you can focus forward. If you're always leaning on that plan B,
Right.
then you're kind of driving like with your head backwards.
Exactly right. If you're so worried about plan B, then you don't trust plan A, and maybe plan A will never work. I
Yeah.
don't know. But I saw a documentary recently that said, that nurse interviewed people on their deathbeds as to what it is that they had, if they had any regrets at all, right? She said that nobody regretted doing something, but
Mm.
every single one of them she had spoken to, people who were old, regretted things that they did not do. Oh my God, I wish I had done this, right? And that's what I tell people. You know what? The world is going to judge you by whatever it is they're going to judge you by, but that's their problem, not your problem, right? Do you feel committed to what you're doing? And do you feel like makes you happy despite all the uncertain? Every morning I wake up, I'll tell you, there's a lot of uncertainties on a daily basis, and I'll share a fellow Indian thing with you, right? I mean, this is maybe an Indian thing, maybe not, but folks, if you're not Indian, maybe it resonates with you, maybe it doesn't. When I quit my job the first time, I was like, you know what? Oh my God, I'm not going to make money. My wife didn't work for many years, but then she started working later. I'm like, how am I going to be eating my lunches and dinners because I'm not making money, right? Because I have to make some money to eat my meal.
Yeah.
Can I eat meal because my wife worked? And this could be an Indian thing, I'm not sure, right? Or it could be an Asian thing, I'm not sure. So I was like, you know what? I was like, Krish, you know what? I'm going to pay for your meal. Don't worry. You know what? I mean, you can go build this company. I'm like, I know you'll pay for my meal, but I'm somehow a little bit hesitant, right? So I was very hesitant. So the first few weeks in a month was very difficult because I felt like I'm not making money. How am I going to build this thing? And what makes it even harder, and this might be very much an Indian thing, your parents call you and they're like, oh, you're not working? So how are you like paying your bills? Oh, your wife is working and you're paying your bills. So, they rub it literally, right? Exactly the way they want to make you feel. I mean, like, you know what? It's the first few weeks are very difficult.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then I was like, oh, I should be making money, right? And this is advice if you're Indian. If you're non Indian, I don't know if it's a useful advice, so my apologies. So, few weeks went by, a month went by. I'm like, you know what? Of course, she's my wife. We love each other. So, it's all right if she pays for it. It's not a bad thing, right? I'm going to work a few months later. I'm going to pick up a contract and then I'll do.
Yeah.
Few months went by, couple of months went by. I'm like, you know what? We've been married many years. I think it's okay. I think it's all right. Meena works and I'm not working. It's
Yeah.
not a bad thing, right? And then 6 months went by. Of course, Meena should be paying these bills. I've paid the bills all my life. Why should she not pay the bills? It only makes sense that she pays the bills. We are talking equality, and I should be doing it. And then more months went by. We went live after 9 months, and then we wanted to build a mobile app later, but we ended up doing it, so it took another 6 months. 17 months went by. I almost forgot that I used to work, right, for other people, that I made money. And then one day Meena came by and she said, Krish, I know it's been a while. Are you planning to sort of do some other contracting work, or are we just going to wait? And I'm like, wow, it's a very soft way of asking, Krish, are you ever planning to get back to work that actually pays you money, right? So I want to share this story because it's a true story, which is it's funny in a way, but the first month was not funny. The third month was not funny. 18 months and now 5 years later, it doesn't bother me at all. Some months I make money, some months I don't make money. It does not matter. What is it? We skip a meal, we skip 2 meals, we'll have dinner, we'll have one less lunch or something, right? So the one piece of advice I'll give people is you have to sign up for sacrifices. If you tell yourself that you're not going to change your lifestyle and you're going to build a company, maybe you can do it. I'm not saying you cannot do it, but I couldn't do it that way. And I know a lot of people who couldn't do it that way. You're going to have to make a lot of sacrifices. Diwali parties, you're going to have to watch it on TV. You may not be able to go to a lot of the Diwali parties, right? And even if you went to the Diwali parties, you may not be able to, I don't know, wear these fancy Siddharth Malhotra costumes or whatnot, right? Dresses. You're going to wear a basic $50 or a $30 Abercrombie t shirt and go to a party,
Yeah.
right? So those are the types of sacrifices you might possibly want to make. I have a question for you, a simple question, but does it answer your broad question there, Siddharth?
No, I think yeah, you did answer. Only part I want to hear is like, how did you land on creating the podcast part, which is
Sorry, I forgot the question. So we had a little bit of money for advertisements. So we were advertising the product on Google, on Pinterest, on the App Store. Now I don't know anything about campaigning and I studied marketing for 200 years in college. I did so many credits and I thought I was an expert marketer or advertiser. You mentioned this, and I'm going to say that again. I realized that everything you learn in college is only good till you're in college. The time you step out of college, everything you've learned in college, at least for a lot of people, like I know you mentioned that, I'm going to say that it doesn't take you any further. I thought I did wonderful engineering courses back in India. I did it, but circuit theory and modern physics and quantum mechanics is not paying my bills today, unfortunately, right? None of those courses make any difference at all. And I struggled with a lot of those courses as well. So we spent this money on advertising, not knowing how to do these campaigns. We learned it as we went. We don't have a systems engineer. We don't have an advertiser. We don't have a content marketer. I'm like, how do I learn how to do these things if I don't talk to people who do this?
yeah,
And I'm like, what? Someone told me, Krish, you do this solo podcast. Why don't you bring people onto your podcast and you can learn from them and have other people learn from them? That's an awesome idea. It's a brilliant, brilliant idea that somebody told me. And they didn't know me. I didn't work with them. It's just people I'd connected with on LinkedIn. Then I called the first person. They were very hesitant because Krish has never done a podcast. What if he screws this up like royally, right? He doesn't know what the heck he's doing. I tell people, you know what, please assume the worst. Don't assume, go look at my profile, assume that everything there is just embellished, which is not, to be honest, but don't give it any credit. And if you want to take a chance, come. I asked a lot of my friends who went to school with me, went to college with me, they bailed out. They were like,
uh,
dude, I don't know. I don't want to do this podcast. I'm not sure. Either they didn't trust me or they didn't trust themselves. I don't know which of it is true. Maybe it's a combination of more things. They didn't show up.
yeah,
Strangers ended up showing up, and it became like a wonderful experience for me because people told me that, that people actually thought I did this full time. There are people who ask me in the podcast, Krish, do you actually do something else? I thought you were just a full time podcast. I'm like, no, I don't do. I'm not a full time podcaster. The reason I end up doing this is because we didn't have enough money to do advertising, right? So we needed to provide more value on top of the solo podcast. So people subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, on Apple, on LinkedIn, on Dev2, on Medium, on every other platform that you can think of, right? And then we figured we'll provide more value for free, right? At this point, at least the podcasts are free. So people
yeah,
can learn about us as a company. I was thinking nobody's going to show up. Thankfully, touch wood, people have actually found value in this as much as I find value in having this conversation.
I mean, when I looked at it, I was like, oh, that looks like you've been doing it for a while. Yeah.
Yeah, and I hope, my hope is this experience has been reasonably enjoyable for you as much as been it
Yeah.
has been for me.
Yeah.
Because that's the only way I have more people show up, right? People hit me up like the other day. I talked to somebody who runs, a company, an AI company in Boston. It's a beautiful conversation. It's a hands-on session. It was a 3-hour hands-on session with Andrew, and we might end up collaborating as companies, right? So things, we don't end up having a conversation with an ulterior motive, and that's not me as a person or us as a company. We do it with zero ulterior. The motive is obvious, right? There's no other ulterior motive, and if more good things come out of it, great. If not, at least we had a good conversation. So the podcast is one of the 5 things we do as a company. You didn't ask me about the education platform. We have an education platform, for instance, but the podcast is simply because sometimes, we are a small team and I get lonely as well, and I want to talk about different things with people I've never actually had a conversation with. So that is the reason behind doing the podcast. Hopefully that
You know,
makes sense.
it's awesome. Yeah, it makes so much sense.
Yeah. And if you
Good.
don't have any, you have any other questions?
No, this is good right now. Yeah.
And I have one last thing to ask you, which is non-technical, which is I ask people, some in your case, it may be less interesting to me because we come from the same part of the world, but I'm going to ask the same question regardless. What is your favorite food, like your favorite dish? And since not everybody, people may or may not identify or know what that is, so if you could just explain to people what it is, like, is it a lunch meal or a dinner meal? And, if people live in the US, where can they go find it?
Oh, so I love Indian food, but my answer is not going to be Indian because cook Indian all the time. I love cooking too, so I cook it with my wife sometimes. My favorite is although um, is kung pao tofu. I've now learned to make it also, but you can go to any Asian restaurant, Chinese restaurant, and you can ask for it. I think it's pretty popular. It's hot sauce with tofu and peanuts and bell peppers and onion in it, and it tastes pretty awesome with rice. But yeah, that's my go-to dish if I have to go out and eat. It's
You know what? It's a great dish because my wife is Indian from Malaysia, so she cooks not Indian Chinese as we know of Indian Chinese, but actual Chinese
actual
food,
Chinese.
right? So, but the vegetarian version of it because we are vegetarian.
Same here.
So I'm assuming a vegetarian as
Yeah,
well,
I'm
right?
vegetarian too. That's why I said kung pao tofu, which is
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
why you have to ask to make it. Most restaurants have kung pao chicken, um, which is basically you have to ask them to make it the tofu version of it.
Which
Yeah.
is awesome. We love Chinese food, and we go to a few places in DC. And yesterday we had mapo tofu, which is a different
Map-
version, right? Mapo tofu is just a spicier version of it, but which is awesome to know. Anything else you want to share about yourself from a non-technical standpoint? Anything fun that people would be like, hey, this is Siddharth. I know everything you've shared here, Siddharth. By the way, before I forget, thank you so much for taking the time to have this chat. Sharing your experience, personal and professional, because it's not just learning, it's certainly learning for me, right? No two ways about that. But the idea here is also learning for people from all walks of life, right? Hey, this is how somebody who's like a smart engineering leader who lives in Seattle where great software is being built, it's coming from the horse's mouth, right? Whatever you say is somebody who lives in and builds this remarkable stuff on a daily basis. If somebody stumbles into this podcast and they're just getting out of college, it's so cool to know, because I wish I had access to these things when I graduated, because I would have done a lot lesser mistakes. I'm not going to say I would have done no mistakes. I
Yeah,
would have done a lot fewer mistakes if I had access to this great information. People who are
absolutely.
smarter than me and sharing this great information, right? Which is, thank you so much for taking the time. So, last thing is, anything else you want for our audience to know about Siddharth as a person?
Oh, Siddharth as a person. Yeah, fun living. I have two boys. My wife is also works in tech. She's taken a sabbatical because she wants to start something of her own right now. She's incubating that right now. But yeah, two boys, 12 and 8. So fun household, very busy. We love road trips. So when we get chance, we try to do them. Recently went to Bali. We loved it. So yeah, that's kind of quick fun things about me. And one last advice to people is find some mentors in your life, right? They would help you. uh, Find some mentors. at least I've been very, very, like, I know when I had mentors that I worked with on certain things, I grew faster. And then there were times when I tried to figure out everything on my own and it took much longer. So find mentors, find people who have done this. It's going to make your life a lot more easier and you might have more clear actions. I've done that with so many people and I've done it with myself. So yeah, speaking out of experience.
I think it's a great piece of advice as well. So, folks, I know we picked a topic, not necessarily delve deeper into that topic, and I think that's quite expected because the conversation leads us where it leads us.
Yeah.
But I'm positive that everybody who's watching this is going to have as much learning from Siddharth Parakh as much as I've had. So one more time, on behalf of folks at Snowpal and our audience, Siddharth, thank you so much for
Thank you.
taking time. I know we ran over, but appreciate your patience and your inputs into all of it that we discussed today.
No, absolutely. Absolutely loved my time talking with you, Chris. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah,
Yeah, you want to stay for just 2 minutes after I end this so the upload happens, but I'm going to end the podcast here. Thanks, folks.
let's do that. Yeah. Thank you.